One of the great things about life is that we are always learning and developing. As a photographer, there's always new ways that we can use our cameras to connect with our creativity and the world around us. I believe we are drawn to these techniques at a time that is right for our own photographic development. Today was one of those days for me, as I headed out to use a Nikon Z's internal focus stacking feature for the first time, and I was excited to put the theory I'd learned at home into practice in the field. Oh, I am so excited for this afternoon. It's currently just under an hour and a half until sunset. I'm at the coast, there is beautiful snow on the landscape, and I'm at a lighthouse. It's been a while since I last photographed this lighthouse, and I felt really called to come here this evening. And I have a technique that I've never tried before on my camera that I want to try today. And this location is perfect for it. So let's head round to the rockier side and see what images I can create today. The clouds were looking amazing at this point, and as I headed round to the rocks, I was feeling really optimistic. I came to this specific location because I wanted to find a scene that I knew would have a lot of foreground opportunities, which the rocks certainly offered. This location is, however, a challenging one. With so many rocks to choose from, finding a composition that works here can often require time and patience. I began looking for a composition by heading back to a familiar spot. For those of you who kindly bought my lighthouse calendar a few years ago, you may recognise this pool. With my 24 to 70mm lens, it wasn't possible to include the pool and the lighthouse in the frame, so I swapped it for my 14 to 30mm wide-angle lens. However, despite changing my lens, this composition still wasn't quite working as I'd hoped, so the task of finding a new one began. With time on my side, I walked around searching for a vantage point that gave me a nice foreground. This turned out to be quite a difficult task, and as I framed up a number of test images, I was finding it a challenge to find one that I really liked. But with some perseverance, I got there. I think I might just to find a composition that could potentially work. Now that was challenging, but a fun challenge at that. Let me explain what composition I'd chosen and why. I've got this pool of water in front of me that's got ice in it. We've got little bits of ice and snow along the ridges of the rock here. There's rocks on either side of it that almost act as a leading line. Then we've got another leading line in the middle going into further rocks that lead you out to more snow and the lighthouse. So this is going to be my image this evening. Right now the exposure is a bit crazy and all over the place because we've got very dark rocks and a very bright sky. But I'm hoping once the sun sets in about 20 minutes, the sky will become darker. We'll get that moody blue colour as we get closer to blue hour. And a lot of the really exciting clouds that we had at the beginning of this video have disappeared, but there's still some clouds and interest in the sky. So we'll see what the next sort of 45 minutes or so have in store. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up this camera properly, get it exactly where I want it, and I may put my polarizing filter on as well, just to see if that enhances the sky. And then it's just a case of waiting, setting the camera up and waiting. I've just put my polarizing filter on the front of my lens, and at the moment I have to say I'm much preferring the image without it. Let me show you what I mean. This is what the image looks like without the polarizer, And this is what it looks like with the Polarizer. Now, as you can see, the Polarizer is completely getting rid of the glare, which is often what you want to happen when you're using a polarizing filter. But because we've got this beautiful piece of ice in this pool of water that's not usually there, I really want that to be clear and emphasised in this image. And as a result, as the conditions stand right now, I do prefer them without the polarising filter. Now that may change as the sun begins to set, because the Polarizer should begin to enhance the sky. So I'm going to keep it on, waiting in anticipation for that to happen without it being polarised for now, and then I may move it round to full polarisation in about 20 minutes or so.
Before I began practicing the focus stacking technique, I took an image to show you what the scene would look like as a single exposure. As you can see, some of the image is sharp, with other areas not. Using a wide-angle lens and having the foreground so close to my camera, with the lighthouse in the distance, makes it impossible for the camera to be able to focus on everything, no matter what settings I chose to use. This was exactly why I'd chosen to come to this location though. I knew it would be a great place to practice focus stacking and really see the results of doing it. And now it was time to try out the technique. I turned my camera to manual mode to ensure the exposure settings were exactly the same for all images taken. I focused on the nearest point to the camera and switched on autofocus so the camera's inbuilt stacking system could operate. I then played around with how many images the camera took in the sequence, starting with 10 and working down to 8, which I found was a sweet spot in this situation. Like when learning anything new, it did take a bit of trial and error. After a few sequences, everything was working perfectly. As you can see, they are perfectly sharp from front to back, making for a more striking image than the single exposure. Now that I had mastered focus stacking, I waited around in the hope that the light would improve. The very cold weather made sitting around very uncomfortable though, and so I spent much time walking around to generate heat and admiring the other beautiful scenes that surrounded me.
I do feel this evening that just sitting and concentrating on this one image is probably not the best option. There's so many amazing opportunities all around me. But it's been so long since I last came out and just focused on one image. So I guess this afternoon, just sitting here waiting for a potential glow after sunset is actually a very mindful thing to do. And it allows me to look at all these things and just appreciate them. But this image I had in mind for this evening, getting good light now, is not looking hopeful. But hey, you never know. It's really not looking hopeful. There's just barely any cloud at all around the lighthouse now. And I could wait here for another half an hour until we get into blue hour and have that lovely blueness in the sky with the lighthouse shining. And that would probably reflect nicely on the pool of water as well. But it is very cold today, and quite frankly, I'm just not feeling it. Without those clouds, I'm just not convinced it's worth waiting in the cold for another half an hour to do that. So instead, I'm going to sign off this video and thank you all once again for watching. I'm hoping this technique has worked. Judging by what I see in the back of my camera, I think it has, but I'm not going to know for certain until I get home. I have been checking the sharpness throughout, but I'm never 100% certain until I get home to the computer. So we'll see how those images turned out when I get back. And not had the light I hoped for this afternoon, but it's been great to get out nevertheless and just embrace this beautiful cold snap that we've had, because it is beautiful and it's well worth photographing.
Before I completely packed up, I moved my camera around a bit and tried some slightly different compositions. It was great to keep practicing using the focus stacking settings. The more we practice something, the more we build the pathways in our brains to remember how to do it again in the future. And while the light hadn't materialised as I'd hoped, I really enjoyed this trip out with the camera. If I'm completely honest, when I saw the final results, having had this camera for 2 years, I wondered why I hadn't tried this technique before. But like I said at the start, I believe we feel drawn to learning new techniques when the time is right for us. And now the time certainly felt right for me to delve into the world of focus stacking. What photographic techniques have you been learning recently? Please let me know in the comments below.